The air in the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel shimmered with the flash of diamonds and the clinking of crystal flutes. For Damien Vance, tonight was the summit of his ambition, a place where power and influence were the only currency that mattered. He stood a titan in a tailored Tom Ford suit, with the perfect woman on his arm. But then, across the room, he saw a ghost from his past. A woman in a simple, unremarkable dress, his ex-wife. A wave of cruel amusement washed over him. He was about to learn that some ghosts don't just haunt you, they come back to claim the throne. The Metropolis Philanthropy Gala was not merely a party, it was a battlefield disguised in velvet and silk. Here, fortunes were silently won and lost in the space of a handshake, and reputations were forged or shattered by a single, well-placed whisper. Damien Vance understood the rules better than anyone. He moved through the glittering throng with the predatory grace of a shark. His smile, a carefully calibrated instrument of charm and intimidation. On his arm was Chloe Sterling, a woman who seemed poured from champagne and sculpted from ambition. Her dress, a creation of shimmering gold sequins by a designer whose name was a password into the highest echelons of society, clung to her like a second skin. She was his perfect accessory, a testament to his success, a living, breathing trophy that screamed to the world, "I have arrived." "Damien, darling," Chloe purred her fingers, tracing the lapel of his tuxedo. "Gregory Shaw is over by the ice sculpture. He hasn't taken his eyes off you." Damien's gaze followed hers. Gregory Shaw, a man whose firm Sterling & Shaw was the only real competitor to Vance Capital, stood with a group of aging investors. He was old money, a dinosaur who believed in legacy and handshakes over aggressive acquisitions. Damien despised him and everything he stood for. "Let him look," Damien said, a smirk playing on his lips. He took a sip of his scotch, the aged liquor a comforting burn in his throat. He's probably wondering how a boy from the wrong side of the tracks managed to build an empire that's about to swallow his. The story was Damien's favourite narrative, one he had polished to a high sheen. The gritty tale of his rise from a working-class neighbourhood, fueled by nothing but raw intellect and a ruthless drive. He'd conveniently edited out the early years, the years of struggle, where he wasn't the lion, but the scrawny cub being fed and nurtured. He'd edited out the person who had done the nurturing, his first wife, Isabel. The thought of her was like finding a piece of grit in a mouthful of oyster, unpleasant and instantly discarded. She was a relic of a past he had shed like a snake's skin. The quiet, supportive girl who had worked 2 jobs to put him through business school, who believed in his dreams when they were nothing but scribbles on napkins in their tiny, cramped apartment. The woman who typed his papers, managed their meager finances, and told him he was brilliant when the world told him he was nobody. He had repaid her, of course. When his first major deal landed, he'd bought her a nice, sensible house in a nice, sensible suburb. He'd thought it was a generous reward, but as his world expanded, hers seemed to shrink. While he was dining with CEOs and flying to international conferences, she was attending PTA meetings and organizing neighborhood book clubs. She hadn't kept up. She hadn't understood that the climb required a different kind of partner. A partner like Chloe who understood the language of power, not the language of encouragement. The divorce had been swift and clinical. He'd been generous with the settlement, he told himself. More than enough for a woman of her simple tastes to live comfortably for the rest of her life. He hadn't heard from her in 5 years, and he preferred it that way. She was a closed chapter, a footnote in his epic biography. "He's coming over," Chloe whispered, her grip on his arm tightening with excitement. Damien straightened his tie, the smirk morphing into a mask of professional cordiality. "Gregory, good to see you. I didn't think these charity circuses were your scene." Gregory Shaw, a man with a face like a weathered cliffside, gave a curt nod. His eyes, pale and shrewd, flickered from Damien to Chloe, taking in the ostentatious display with a flicker of what looked like distaste. "Vance, my wife sits on the board," Some of us still believe in giving back without expecting a press release. The jab was subtle, but it landed. Damien felt a prickle of irritation. Philanthropy is the new frontier of networking, Gregory. You should try it. It might help your firm's antiquated image. Before Shaw could retort, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. The host of the evening, the universally respected philanthropist and tech billionaire Alistair Finch, was walking toward the stage. The main event is about to start. Chloe breathed, her eyes shining. I heard the guest of honor this year is a total recluse. Some anonymous tech wizard who developed a new platform for charity logistics. Damien feigned a yawn. Probably some pale programmer who hasn't seen the sun in a decade. Let's get this over with. I want to talk to you later, Gregory, about the North Star acquisition. I have a feeling you're about to be outbid. He turned his back on Shaw, a power move designed to assert dominance. He scanned the room, feeling the familiar surge of triumph. He was at the top of his world. Every person in this room was either someone he had beaten someone he was about to beat, or someone who desperately wanted his favor. He was invincible. And then he saw her. Across the sprawling ballroom, standing near a pillar, almost hidden in the shadows. It was her, Isabel. He would have recognized her anywhere, even after all these years, but it was a distorted, funhouse mirror version of her. She was thinner, the soft lines of her face now etched with a quiet confidence he'd never seen before. Her hair, which she used to keep in a practical shoulder-length cut, now fell in dark, elegant waves. But it was the dress that drew his eye and his scorn. In a sea of couture gowns, sparkling with jewels and brand recognition, she was wearing a simple, unadorned dress. It was a column of deep sapphire silk, long-sleeved, high-necked, and utterly devoid of any embellishment. It wasn't ugly, but in this context, it was a declaration of nothing. It was plain. It was forgettable. It was the kind of dress a secretary might wear to an office party. He felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, a harsh, ugly sound. The ghost from his past wasn't just here. She was committing the Gala's greatest sin. She was irrelevant. My God, look at that! Damien chuckled, nudging Chloe with his elbow. He didn't bother to lower his voice. Let the whole world see how far he had come and how far she had fallen. Chloe followed his gaze, her perfectly glossed lips twisting into a moue of confusion, then dawning contempt. Who is that? Is she on the catering staff? Worse, Damien said, savoring the moment. That's Isabel, my ex-wife. Chloe's eyes widened, first in shock and then in delicious second-hand victory. She looked from the drab sapphire dress back to her own glittering gold sheath. The comparison was stark, and it was everything. That's her. The one you told me about, the suburban housewife, the one and only Damien, confirmed his voice, laced with mocking pity. I have no idea how she even got a ticket to this event. Probably won it in a raffle at her local library. The two of them shared a laugh, a cruel, private bubble of sound in the sophisticated hum of the gala. To Damien, Isabel's presence was an affront, but also a gift. It was a tangible measure of his success. He was here at the center of the universe with a goddess on his arm. She was there on the periphery, a wallflower in a dress that probably cost less than their bottle of champagne. He watched as she took a glass of water from a passing waiter, her movements graceful and unhurried. She wasn't looking around frantically, trying to network or be seen. She wasn't trying to catch his eye. She seemed perfectly content observing the room with a calm, detached interest that infuriated him. How dare she be calm? She should be ashamed, embarrassed, utterly humiliated to be in the same room as him and his new life. She looks so plain, Chloe observed, her voice dripping with condescension. And that dress. It's a complete non-statement. No designer would ever make something so boring. Belle always had simple tastes, Damien said, using his old pet name for her like a weapon. She wouldn't know a Dior from a discount rack. I remember I once bought her a beautiful diamond necklace for our anniversary. She cried. Tears of joy, I assume, Chloe asked. Tears of guilt. She said the money could have been used to fix the leaky roof. Can you imagine I was trying to give her a taste of the good life, and she was worried about plumbing? He shook his head in theatrical disbelief. That's when I knew it was over. We were speaking different languages. I was speaking the language of ambition and success. She was speaking the language of mediocrity. His gaze remained fixed on Isabel, a man Damien vaguely recognized. Someone with the quiet intellectual air of an academic approached her. They began to speak. Isabel smiled a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her face. Damien felt an unexpected and unwelcome jolt in his gut. He hadn't seen that smile directed at him in years, not even before the end. The man, whoever he was, laughed at something she said. His expression one of clear admiration. Who was he? A new husband, a boyfriend, some other small-town dreamer she'd latched onto. The idea was pathetic. The man was wearing a standard off-the-rack tuxedo, his shoes well worn. They looked like a match set. Two sparrows in a flock of peacocks. I almost feel sorry for her, Chloe said, though her tone suggested the exact opposite. Trapped in the past while you're building the future. It's actually quite tragic. Tragedy is a strong word. Damien countered his ego, puffing up like a peacock's tail. It was a necessary evolution. Some people are meant to be launching pads, Chloe. They serve their purpose, and then you take flight. You can't carry them with you, or their weight will drag you back to earth. He was so engrossed in his own self-aggrandizing monologue that he almost missed Gregory Shaw watching him from a few feet away. Shaw's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were fixed on Damien, then flickered over to Isabel, then back again. There was no pity in Shaw's eyes, no amusement. There was something else, something Damien couldn't quite decipher, but it made him uneasy. He dismissed it. Shaw was a relic. What could he possibly understand about modern relationships and the cost of success? Damien decided to press his advantage to make the humiliation complete. He raised his glass in Isabel's direction, a gesture of mock acknowledgement. She didn't see it. She was completely absorbed in her conversation, her back now slightly turned to him. The audacity of it, to not even be looking for him, to be so completely indifferent to his presence. The quiet rage he'd felt earlier began to simmer. He had discarded her. He had been the one to move on to bigger and better things. She had no right to look so whole. She was supposed to be a ruin, a monument to the life she'd lost. Instead, she just looked serene. Let's go and say hello, Chloe suggested suddenly, a wicked glint in her eye. It's the polite thing to do, isn't it? To offer one's condolences. Damien considered it for a second. The idea of standing before Isabel with Chloe, in all her glittering glory, was tempting, a final public demonstration of his victory. But something held him back. It was the look in Shaw's eyes, the quiet confidence in Isabel's posture. A tiny nagging voice in the back of his mind warned him that this was a battlefield and he might not fully understand the terrain. No, he said, his voice clipped. Why would I waste my time? She's a nobody, a ghost, and we don't talk to ghosts. He turned his back on her, a final dismissive act. He would focus on the prize Gregory Shaw and the North Star acquisition. Isabel Reed and her drab little life were beneath his notice. He put her out of his mind completely and utterly. He was a master of his universe, after all, and in his universe she no longer existed. The chandeliers overhead cast a warm golden glow as Alistair Finch tapped the microphone. A wave of respectful silence washed over the ballroom. Finch was a legend not just for the fortune he'd built with his pioneering software company Finch Systems, but for the way he was now giving it away. He was a kingmaker in the world of philanthropy, and when he spoke, everyone listened. Damien stood with his arms crossed, a mask of polite interest plastered on his face. He hated these self-congratulatory speeches. It was all a pretense. Everyone here had written a check, and now they had to sit through a half-hour of sanctimonious drivel before they could get back to the real business of cutting deals. Good evening, and thank you all for being here, Finch, began his voice, calm and authoritative. Tonight we celebrate the spirit of giving. But more than that, we celebrate the spirit of innovation. Because it's not enough to simply throw money at a problem. True change requires a new way of thinking, a new vision. Damien rolled his eyes, subtly. Chloe, sensing his boredom, gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "It'll be over soon," she whispered. "Then you can corner Shaw." For the past year, Finch continued his gaze, sweeping across the sea of expectant faces. The Finch Foundation has been working in secret, with a visionary partner. An individual who saw a fundamental flaw in the landscape of charitable giving. They saw inefficiency, a disconnect between the immense generosity of corporations and the desperate needs of non-profits on the ground. Damien's attention sharpened slightly. He was a man who appreciated efficiency. This was at least getting interesting. This individual envisioned a new system, a platform, one that uses predictive analytics and a sophisticated AI engine to match corporate donors with grassroots organizations, ensuring that resources flow not just to the most well-known charities, but to the most effective ones, regardless of their size or marketing budget. A system to democratize philanthropy itself. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was more than just a new charity, it was a new paradigm. Damien found himself intrigued despite his cynicism. Such a platform would be a powerful tool. The data alone would be worth a fortune. Who was behind it? He mentally scrolled through the usual suspects, the tech billionaires from Silicon Valley, the hedge fund gurus who'd recently found their conscience. The creator of this platform, which we are officially launching tonight, chose to remain anonymous throughout its development. Finch said, a smile touching his lips. They are not a person who seeks the spotlight. They believe, as I do, that the work should always be more famous than the worker. They poured their own resources, their own time and their own genius into this project, seeking no recognition. Damien scoffed internally. No recognition. What a naive concept. Recognition was power. Anonymity was for the weak. Still, he couldn't deny the brilliance of the strategy. Build the hype, create the mystery, and then step into the spotlight to reap the rewards. It was a move he would have respected. This platform is called the Aura Initiative, Finch announced, and on the massive screens behind him, a sleek, minimalist logo appeared, a stylized letter, A, that radiated gentle waves of blue light. And it has the potential to reshape how we heal our world. In its beta phase alone, it has already directed over $90 million in funding to overlooked projects, increasing their operational efficiency by an average of 400%. A collective gasp went through the room. $90 million, 400% efficiency. These were not the soft, sentimental numbers of charity. This was the hard, brutal language of disruption. Damien's mind raced. He had to know who was behind this. He needed to meet them to understand their methods, perhaps even to invest. This wasn't just philanthropy, it was the future. He saw Gregory Shaw lean forward, his expression one of intense concentration. The old dinosaur was smelling the future too. Tonight, the architect of the Aura Initiative has finally agreed to step out from behind the curtain. Finch said, his voice building to a crescendo. Not for personal glory, but because they believe the project has reached a stage where a public face is necessary to guide its expansion. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. Damien craned his neck, trying to guess who it could be. Was it Martin Lowell, the reclusive software mogul? Or perhaps Sarah Prentice, the Wall Street quant who had retired at 40? This person is a testament to the fact that true genius is not loud, it is not arrogant, it does not demand attention. Finch declared his words, seeming to hang in the air. It works quietly, diligently, and with a purpose that transcends ego. Damien felt a strange, uncomfortable sensation, as if the words were somehow aimed at him. He glanced over at Chloe, but she was staring at the stage, captivated. This person reminds us that the most brilliant minds are often the ones we overlook. that the greatest strength can come from the quietest corners, that a person's worth is not defined by the labels the world gives them, but by the value they create. The discomfort grew. Finch's speech was veering away from a standard introduction and becoming a lecture, a sermon. A sermon on humility, on substance over style. Everything Damien privately scorned. "It is my profound honour," Alistair Finch said, his voice ringing with genuine heartfelt respect, "to introduce you to the founder and chief architect of the Aura Initiative, the person whose vision we are all here to celebrate tonight. Please welcome to the stage Ms. Isabel Reed." The name hung in the air for a single silent, impossible second. Isabel Reed. For Damien, the world didn't just stop. It fractured. The sound of Alistair Finch's voice seemed to echo from a vast distance, the name ricocheting inside his skull. Isabel Reed. Isabel Reed. It was a name he had buried, a name that belonged to a different life, a different man, a name associated with pot roast PT meetings and a leaky roof. It was not a name that belonged on the lips of Alistair Finch. It was not a name that belonged on this stage. He felt the blood drain from his face. His carefully constructed mask of bored superiority crumbled into dust, leaving behind raw, slack-jawed disbelief. He physically recoiled a small, involuntary step backward, as if he'd been struck. "No," he whispered, the sound a dry rasp in his throat. "No, it can't be." Chloe turned to him, her face a canvas of utter confusion. "Reed like... You're Isabel Reed, is he making a joke?" But it wasn't a joke. From the shadows near the pillar, Isabel Reed began to move. The man she had been speaking with, who Damien now recognized as Marcus Thorne, a highly respected professor of ethics and computer science from MIT, gave her a warm, encouraging smile and a squeeze on the arm before stepping back. And then she walked towards the stage. As she moved into the light, the simple sapphire dress was transformed. It was no longer plain, it was profound. Under the focused spotlights, the silk caught the light, not with a sparkle, but with a deep liquid luminescence like the heart of the ocean. It was a statement of supreme confidence. It didn't need sequins or logos. The woman wearing it was the event. Every eye in the room was on her. And then, as recognition rippled through the few who knew of Damien's past, their eyes darted from her to him. He could feel their gazes like physical blows. He saw Gregory Shaw turn his head slowly, a look of profound, undisguised contempt dawning on his face. He saw investors, colleagues, rivals, all of them looking at him. Their expressions a mixture of shock, pity, and a dawning, brutal understanding. They weren't just looking at him. They were re-evaluating him. They were seeing the man who had laughed at the guest of honor, the man who had mocked the quiet genius in their midst, the man who had thrown away a diamond because he was too stupid to see its worth. The sound that filled the room was a deafening wave of applause. It was thunderous, genuine, and sustained. It wasn't polite charity clapping. It was a standing ovation for a titan. And every clap felt like a hammer blow to Damien's soul. He stood, frozen, a statue of hubris in a Tom Ford suit. His world, which had seemed so solid, so invincible, just moments before, was a house of cards in a hurricane. Chloe's hand, which had been clutching his arm, slipped away. He looked at her and saw the dawning horror in her eyes. It wasn't horror for him. It was horror for herself, for having aligned herself with a fool. The value of her own stock had just plummeted by association. Isabel reached the stage and shook Alistair Finch's hand. She moved with an easy grace, a quiet dignity that radiated a power far more potent than Damien's loud, aggressive dominance. She wasn't the mousy, insecure woman he remembered. Or perhaps he realized with a sickening lurch she had never been that woman. Perhaps that was just the version of her he had created in his own mind to justify leaving her behind. She stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone. The room fell silent once more. Her eyes scanned the audience, calm and composed. For a fleeting moment, her gaze passed over him. There was no triumph in her eyes, no anger, no "I told you so." There was nothing. It was the look one gives a stranger in a crowd, a face you see and instantly forget. And that utter lack of recognition, that complete and total indifference, was more devastating than any words of condemnation could ever be. In that single fleeting glance, she erased him from her story. He was not the villain. He was not even a footnote. He was simply, not there. The laughter in the ballroom had died, but Damien could still hear it echoing in his ears. His own cruel braying laugh, a laugh that had not been at his ex-wife's dress, but at his own spectacular world-shattering ignorance. Isabel Reed stood at the podium, a figure of serene authority against the backdrop of her own creation, the glowing Aura logo. The 1,000 pairs of eyes in the room, belonging to some of the most powerful people in the world, were fixed on her waiting. Damien watched, mesmerized and horrified, as if observing his own execution. "Thank you, Alistair," she began, her voice clear and steady. It was the same voice that had once asked him if he wanted coffee, the same voice that had once read bedtime stories, but it was imbued with a new resonance, a new weight. "And thank you all. I'm not someone who is comfortable with the spotlight. In fact, for most of my life, I preferred the shadows." Her eyes swept the room, and a small, wry smile touched her lips. "The shadows are a good place to observe. You see things that people in the spotlight often miss. You see the quiet struggles, the overlooked needs. You see the gaps." Damien felt his collar tighten. Every word, though general, felt like a precision-guided missile aimed directly at his heart. "I'm not a philanthropist in the traditional sense," Isabel continued. "I didn't inherit a fortune, and I didn't build a corporate empire. My currency for many years was time, and I invested that time in learning. After my life took a different direction, I went back to school. I had always loved puzzles, and I saw the world of non-profits as one giant heartbreaking puzzle. So much goodwill, so much passion, but so much inefficiency, so much wasted potential." She had gone back to school. He hadn't known. He had never bothered to ask to find out what she did with her life after he left it. He had just written the checks, signed the papers, and washed his hands of her. The settlement he had thought so generous, she had used it not to live comfortably, but to re-educate herself, to arm herself with knowledge. He had funded the very weapon that was now dismantling his world. The Aura Initiative was born from a simple question. She explained her passion for the subject, making her glow. How can we connect the immense power of corporate capital with the nuanced, specific needs of the people on the front lines? The answer wasn't just about money, it was about data. It was about creating a system that could listen, learn, and direct resources with the intelligence and precision of a surgeon. She went on to describe the architecture of the AI, the ethical considerations programmed by her and her partner, Marcus Thorne, the way it protected the dignity of the recipients while ensuring accountability for the donors. She spoke not in the abstract, but with concrete examples. A small clinic in rural Appalachia that got funding for a new MRI machine because Aura identified a spike in a specific medical condition in their county. A youth center in Detroit that was matched with a tech company to build a coding academy for at-risk teens. She was brilliant. Not just intelligent, but truly breathtakingly brilliant. The concepts were complex, the vision vast, the execution flawless. And he had thought her simple. He had called her mediocre. He had laughed at her. The memory was so vivid, so mortifying that he felt a wave of nausea. True value, Isabel said, her voice softening as she neared her conclusion, is often hidden. It's not in the flashiest package or the loudest voice. It's in the quiet dedication, the relentless pursuit of a solution, the work you do when no one is watching. The Aura Initiative is designed to find that hidden value, to shine a light on the people and projects that the world has overlooked, and to remind us all that the greatest potential often lies where we least expect to find it. She paused, and her eyes for one final moment seemed to find his in the crowd. This time there was a flicker of something. Not pity, not anger. It was a calm, sad finality, the look of a chapter being closed for good. Thank you. The applause that erupted was even more thunderous than before. It was a roar of approval, of awe. Alistair Finch and Marcus Thorne joined her on the stage, and the three of them stood together, a triumvirate of quiet, world-changing power. Damien was invisible. The people around him were no longer looking at him. They were all turned towards the stage, captivated. He turned to say something to Chloe, anything to ground himself, but she was already talking animatedly to a man on her other side, her face alight with opportunistic zeal. She had already cut her losses. She was paddling away from his sinking ship as fast as she could. Then he felt a presence beside him. It was Gregory Shaw. Damien braced himself for a blow, a gloating remark, a final twist of the knife. But Shaw's voice was quiet, almost reflective. I knew her father, you know. Robert Reed, a brilliant engineer. Taught me more about structural integrity in one afternoon than I learned in 4 years of college. He always said his greatest creation wasn't any of his patents, but his daughter. Said she had a mind that could see around corners. Shaw looked from the stage back to Damien, and now his eyes held a cold, clinical judgment. You, Vance, you only see what's right in front of your face. You look at a skyscraper and see the glass and steel. She looks at it and sees the foundation. And you, my friend, you just proved to everyone in this room that you have no foundation at all. Shaw turned and walked away, leaving Damien standing alone in the wreckage of his own making. The laughter he'd shared with Chloe now seemed like the cackle of a madman in an asylum he had built for himself. He had been the apex predator, the king of the Gala, and in the space of 10 minutes he had become the court jester. The only thing he had managed to kill was his own future. The rest of the Gala passed in a blur of humiliation for Damien. The air around him seemed to have changed its composition. It was thin, and he couldn't quite catch his breath. The clusters of people he had schmoozed with earlier now seemed to part like the Red Sea as he approached. Their smiles became tight, their eyes evasive. He was no longer a predator to be feared, but a cautionary tale to be avoided. He was radioactive. Chloe had fully detached, seamlessly integrating into a group, surrounding a tech investor, laughing at their jokes, as if she hadn't just had her own world upended. She was a survivor, and he was a sinking anchor. He saw her glance at him once across the room, her expression a cold, hard calculation. The message was clear. You're on your own. He needed to get out, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. His pride, the very engine of his existence, demanded some kind of action, some way to reclaim control of the narrative. But there was no narrative left to control. Isabel had rewritten the entire book. Finally, he saw his chance. The formal presentation was over, and Isabel was descending the stage steps, speaking quietly, with Marcus Thorne. Alistair Finch was fending off the swarm of well-wishers trying to get to her. For a moment she was relatively isolated, driven by a desperate, toxic cocktail of rage, shame and a pathetic flicker of hope. He moved toward her. He had to say something, to explain, to apologize, to rage. He didn't even know. Isabel, he said. His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, thin and reedy. She stopped and turned. The serene, distant expression remained. She looked at him as if he were a junior associate who had forgotten her coffee order. Damien. Marcus Thorne stepped slightly forward, a subtle but unmistakable protective posture. His eyes were cold and intelligent. He knew exactly who Damien was. Damien started, the old pet name slipping out, sounding absurd and presumptuous now. I had no idea. What you've been doing, it's incredible. Thank you, she said, her tone polite and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the kind of thanks you give to a cashier who hands you your change. I mean it, he pressed, his desperation growing. Going back to school, building all this. Why didn't you ever tell me? A faint, almost imperceptible line appeared between her eyebrows. It was a look of genuine confusion. Why would I have told you? My life and what I choose to do with it hasn't been your concern for a very long time. Her words were simple, factual, and they cut him deeper than any insult could. She wasn't trying to wound him. She was simply stating a truth he had been too arrogant to comprehend. Their lives were no longer connected. He had severed the thread himself. But the settlement, he stammered like a fool trying to claim credit for the sun rising. I gave you... Yes, you did, she interrupted, her voice still unnervingly calm. You gave me a severance package for years of service. I am grateful for the seed capital. I believe I have put it to good use. Seed capital, severance package. She had reduced their entire history, their marriage to a business transaction. And worse, he knew she was right. That's exactly how he had treated it. He looked from her face now, so full of a strength he'd never recognized, to Marcus Thorne, who was watching him with undisguised disdain. He saw the partnership there, the mutual respect. He saw the world she had built without him, a world so much richer and more meaningful than the gilded cage he had constructed for himself. I made a mistake, he finally whispered, the confession torn from the very depths of his shattered ego. Isabel looked at him for a long moment. He searched her eyes for a flicker of her old self, for the soft-hearted girl who might have felt a pang of sympathy. He found nothing, only a calm, clear-eyed assessment. No, Damien, she said, her voice finally losing its absolute neutrality and taking on a note of finality, of weary wisdom. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose a life based on what things look like, and I chose to build one based on what they are. You have your life, and I have mine. She gave a slight nod, a gesture of dismissal. Now, if you'll excuse us, Marcus, and I have a meeting with the Secretary of Education. She turned, and together with Marcus Thorne, she walked away, swallowed by a crowd of admirers and people who wanted to change the world with her. She didn't look back. Damien stood alone, the din of the gala fading into a dull roar in his ears. The only sound he could truly hear was the echo of his own laughter, from an hour before, a hollow, foolish sound that now marked the precise moment his entire world had been revealed as a sham. He had laughed at her dress, but the joke he now understood, with devastating clarity, had always been on him. He was the one who was truly impoverished, dressed in nothing but ego and illusion. The sun that streamed into Damien's penthouse the next morning was offensively bright. It sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sterile minimalist apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny mocking spirits. He was lying on his $1,000 frette sheets, still in the wrinkled remains of his tuxedo, the scent of stale champagne and profound failure clinging to him like a shroud. He hadn't slept. He had replayed the moment Isabel's name was announced 1,000 times, each time, feeling the phantom punch to his gut with fresh, sickening force. He reached for his phone on the marble nightstand, a gesture born of years of habit. Mornings were for reviewing overnight market shifts, for reading emails from his teams in London and Hong Kong. His phone was usually a buzzing hive of activity, a constant affirmation of his importance. This morning, it was silent. The eerie lack of notifications was more alarming than a crisis would have been. He unlocked the screen. There were no urgent emails, no missed calls from investors, just 3 text messages. The first was from Chloe. It arrived at 2:15 a.m., likely sent from the back of an Uber after she'd secured a new, more promising contact at the gala. Damien, what happened last night was a professional catastrophe. For both of us. My publicist agrees it is best for my brand that we make a clean and immediate break. I wish you well. The items you gifted me will be messengered to your office tomorrow. It wasn't even signed. It was a press release for an audience of one. He felt a flicker of rage, but it was quickly extinguished by a cold, heavy wave of something else. Resignation. Of course, this was how it would be. Chloe was a creature of his world, and in his world, You don't stand by a sinking asset. You liquidate. The second message was from his head of PR, sent an hour later. Boss, we have a situation. The Gala is blowing up online. Call me as soon as you're up. We need to get ahead of this. Getting ahead of it was impossible. It was like trying to get ahead of an avalanche. You'd started yourself with a single misplaced step. The third message was a news alert from a major financial publication, time-stamped just before dawn. The headline read, "The Angel of Aura. How Secretive Genius. Isabel Reed built a $90 million philanthropic powerhouse under the radar." He clicked on it, his thumb trembling slightly. The article was long glowing and filled with quotes from Alastair Finch and other tech luminaries. It detailed her journey, glossing over her marriage, but pointedly mentioning her return to academia to earn dual master's degrees in computer science and public policy after a significant life change. The article painted her as a modern-day folk hero, a quiet warrior who had channeled personal adversity into world-changing innovation. The last paragraph was the one that made his stomach clench. Perhaps the most telling moment of the evening, the journalist wrote, came not from the stage, but from the audience. As Ms. Reed received her standing ovation, sources at the gala noted the stunned silence of her ex-husband, Wall Street magnate Damien Vance, who had reportedly been mocking his former spouse's simple attire just moments before the reveal. It was a poignant, if unscheduled, real-life illustration of the very principle the Aura Initiative champions, that true value is often overlooked by those most obsessed with status. He threw the phone across the room. It hit the opposite wall with a dull thud and slid to the floor. They hadn't just reported the story. They had crafted a morality play, and he was the villain. He was the fool. The man obsessed with status. He forced himself into the shower, the scalding water doing little to wash away the grime of his humiliation. He put on his most expensive suit, a dark grey brioni, cinching his tie like a noose. His strategy was simple denial. He would walk into his office project, absolute strength, and act as if nothing had happened. Power was perception. He just had to reset the perception. The moment he stepped into the gleaming lobby of Vance Capital, he knew it was a futile effort. The air was different. The usual, brisk, confident energy was replaced with a hushed, nervous tension. His receptionist, a sharp young woman who usually greeted him with a bright, ambitious smile, suddenly found the screen of her computer intensely interesting. The junior analysts, scurrying past with coffee, averted their gazes. He could feel their whispers on the back of his neck, see the furtive glances in the reflection of the polished marble floors. The rot had already seeped into the foundations of his own empire. His private office, a corner suite with a panoramic view of the city, felt less like a throne room and more like a glass cage. He spent the morning trying to work, staring at market data that seemed meaningless. The numbers on the screen were abstract. The judgment in his employee's eyes was real. Just before noon, his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Shaw is on line 1 for you." A surge of adrenaline. Gregory Shaw. The North Star acquisition. This was it. This was his chance to prove that last night was a footnote, a piece of social gossip, irrelevant to the hard-nosed world of business. He would be ruthless professional. He would crush Shaw and remind everyone who he was. He picked up the receiver. "Gregory, I was about to call you. Let's cut to the chase on North Star. My final offer is 1.2 billion all cash. Take it or leave it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Shaw chuckled. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Vance, I'm not calling about North Star. I'm calling as a courtesy. The board and I had a meeting this morning. We've decided to reject your offer. In fact, we've decided to cease all negotiations with Vance Capital effective immediately." Damien's blood ran cold. "What? On what grounds? My offer is 20% above market value. Your shareholders will have your head. Our shareholders want stability." Shaw said, his voice as hard as granite. They want a partner with foresight, with sound judgment, not a gambler who makes impulsive bets. This has nothing to do with the deal, Damien snarled, his composure cracking. This is about last night. You're letting personal gossip interfere with your fiduciary duty. Personal gossip. Shaw's voice rose, laced with a potent, righteous anger. Son, I watched you publicly humiliate a woman who is by any objective measure your superior in intellect, vision, and character. A woman who, it turns out, is poised to become one of the most influential figures in the tech and philanthropic sectors. That's not gossip. That is a catastrophic public demonstration of your core weakness. You don't value people. You value ornaments. You don't recognize innovation. You recognize labels. You mistake a loud voice for a strong one. Shaw took a breath. I spoke to her father once, years ago. He told me Isabel could look at a blueprint and see the single point of failure that everyone else missed. Last night, the entire world looked at you and saw the same thing. You, Damien, are a single point of failure. We're not entrusting our company's legacy to you. We've entered into exclusive talks with another firm. The line went dead. Damien held the receiver for a long moment before placing it back in its cradle with a shaking hand. He had lost North Star. It wasn't just a deal, it was a cornerstone of his 5-year growth strategy. The news broke an hour later. The failure of the Vance Capital bid for North Star was reported as a stunning upset. The articles connected it directly to the events of the Gala. The narrative was solidifying. Damien Vance was a liability. His judgment was flawed. His golden touch was gone. The dominoes began to fall with sickening speed. The stock price for Vance Capital, which was built almost entirely on the cult of his aggressive personality, dipped 5%. Then 10. Nervous investors started calling their voices laced with a new unwelcome skepticism. A major pension fund he'd been courting for months sent a terse email announcing they were re-evaluating their options. He stayed in his office until long after the sun had set, long after the last employee had scurried home. The city that had once been his kingdom now seemed alien and indifferent. Its glittering lights were no longer a promise but a judgment. He was alone, surrounded by the trappings of a success that now felt as hollow as a drum. His computer screen was still on open to a news site. A new photo had been posted. It was Isabel standing between Alistair Finch and Marcus Thorne on the balcony of the New York Stock Exchange, her hand on the ceremonial bell. She was smiling, not a wide, triumphant grin, but the same quiet, confident smile he'd seen at the gala. She was not looking back. She was looking forward at a future he was not a part of. A future he had foolishly, arrogantly thrown away. He reached out and switched off the monitor, plunging the room into darkness, save for the cold, distant lights of the city. The silence that filled his office was absolute. It was the sound of a world that had moved on without him. The sound of his own irrelevance. In that glittering ballroom, Damien Vance learned the harshest lesson of his life. The past you think you've buried can rise again, not as a spectre of what was, but as a titan of what it has become. His mockery was a spotlight, but it illuminated his own ignorance, not his ex-wife's simplicity. Isabel Reed's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her silence, in her complete and utter transcendence of his judgment. She didn't need to fight him, she just had to become herself. What do you think? Was Damien a product of his ambition, or was he always destined to be the man he became? And what would you have done in Isabel's shoes when she took that stage? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned in his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it, Chloe. declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now. Emma gave a weak smile. I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing. Nonsense, Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are. Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. See, she's still in there, Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. Now for the main event. She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. What's this? Emma asked. This, Chloe said with a flourish, is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there. Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron. First, Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose, romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story, the photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. 2 hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend? The handhold seen round the world. Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian, he's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. I know this is an intrusion. May I come in? She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. I came to apologize, he said, turning back to her. My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that. It's not your fault, Emma said, finding her voice. It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours, Alistair countered, and I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here. He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. This is for you. She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone, he explained. Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe. Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. I also saw his statement. Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen. Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming. Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms. He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence. A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. He built his entire empire on my work. The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. What do you mean, his book? Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alastair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alastair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alastair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alastair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alastair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alastair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. "Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process." Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, "To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality." A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, "The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality." A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered a small, wondering smile touching her lips. The storm. I think it's finally over. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. No, he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn. The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn fraud. The Great Pretender and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne. It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the colour back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.